The reality of the situation is it brings up a completely different question. And that question is, what technology do we have today that can actually improve the quality of life of human beings? We're in a very unique time right now where people are recognizing more clearly than ever some of the challenges that exist out in our average world, right? Like our economic situation around the world has become pretty tight, where people can feel the pinch every single day, every increasing year. Things are becoming more and more difficult. And thus, there's many factors as to why that is, but people are starting to say, okay, well, how do we fix that part of our society? And one person that's running for president in 2020, Andrew Yang, who you may or may not have heard much about, is proposing an idea that can start to address that particular issue. And we're going to get into really what that looks like and what that means, and whether or not it's actually going to solve the problem in the long run, or whether we're just kind of going to be experiencing this, pinch as we continue to go more and more, regardless of a universal basic income. Now, of course, as we get into this, the idea of universal basic income inevitably brings up the big questions of who's going to pay for it, or is this a socialist system, or is this just communism, and la-di-da-di-da, all the big scary words that have often been used to manipulate people's minds into not questioning the system at hand. Because as you'll see as we go through this more and more, and examine what Yang is putting forth here, a lot of this is about not questioning the core religious-like beliefs we have about the system at hand today, and why it is absolutely necessary that we begin questioning that on a level even much deeper than what we're going to talk about here with Andrew Yang. But let's get into this, specific to what Andrew Yang says. So we're going to look at how he defines universal basic income, or how he calls it the freedom dividend. So reading right off his site, he says, "The freedom dividend is a form of universal basic income, a type of social security that guarantees a certain amount of money to every citizen within a given governed population, without having to pass a test or fulfill a work requirement. Every UBI plan can be different in terms of amount or design. Andrew Yang is running for president as a Democrat in 2020 to implement a guaranteed income. This form of basic income that he is proposing for the United States is a set of guaranteed payments of $1,000 per month or $12,000 per year to all citizens over the age of 18. Yes, that means you and everyone you know would get $1,000 a month in the US. Yes, that means you and everyone you know would get $1,000 per month every month from the US government, no questions asked." So yes, it is how it sounds. I mean, I've really looked into his policy here. Ultimately, what he's saying is that whether you're rich, whether you're poor, as long as you're over the age of 18, if you opt into this benefit, you can get it. So which means the super wealthy don't have to opt into it. They don't have to say, yes, I want this particular $1,000 a month, right? Thus, you don't really know exactly how much it's going to cost entirely yet, because maybe not every citizen opts into it. However, the idea is that it's available to everyone. So there's no distinction between, who should get it and who shouldn't get it, and what rules should be made and what should have to happen, and la-di-da-di-da. It's just, look, everybody gets it, right? Now, of course, you got to ask the question, why is it that he in particular believes this universal basic income needs to happen? There's a lot of different ideas out there. There's a lot of different people who will propose different ideas, but specific to Yang, we're going to go to an NPR clip here where he's talking amongst a couple of just average voters, the host of the show, and himself, about why he's implementing universal basic income in his policy, and what he saw in his experience that made him want to do this.
Studies have a range of between 20 and 40% of American jobs subject to automation in the next 20 to 30 years, which is not that much time, and that's a lot of jobs. I've seen it in the industries that I've worked in, and we have to get our acts together. If we keep trying to respond to the symptoms and don't address the root causes, then our communities will continue to suffer.
Okay, so there's a couple of things he said within that clip that we have to expand upon. We're going to do that a little bit later. Let's start with some of the big things here. 20 to 40% based on some of the studies when we're talking about jobs that could disappear. Now, what this means is, the more manufacturing jobs that can be automated through robotics, for example, the less people are going to have to do those jobs, right? A lot of times people will view this situation, right, of automation or robotics or efficiency, right? Even utilizing computers, utilizing technology to create greater efficiency, which then removes the need for jobs. You see it at the grocery store with the self-checkouts, right? Now you don't necessarily need to have someone there doing all the work because the machine can pretty much handle that task. And at the same time, a lot of that task, in particular at the grocery store, isn't the most engaging, beautiful thing that you want to be spending 8 hours of your day doing. It's not to say that we judge the job as being good or bad, but is it like, if you had the choice, do you really want to stand behind a counter, scanning items and then giving people change and so forth, collecting money for 40 hours a week for the rest of your life? Like, I'm not saying everybody stays within that, but the point is it's like, are these jobs that we want to be doing? So there's all these different little factors, but ultimately what he's seeing is that automation's everywhere already, and it's only going to continue to come out. And even when he talks about how within 20 or 30 years, a lot of these jobs are going to be removed over the course of time, according to the studies, even within that, you have to think that's 20 or 30 years. By taking automation and stifling it, such that, well, it's going to cost a whole bunch of money to implement this stuff, and we can't put it in too much and be too disruptive because then we're taking away too many jobs too fast. So even those estimates are based upon the idea of just doing everything within the system, within the limitations that we have today. But ultimately, what we're seeing is that what's already happening is only going to increase. People are not going to have jobs over time. Now, this is viewed in some ways. I'm not saying Yang necessarily views it in this way, but some people will view this as a negative thing, right? The more robotics that come along, the more automation that comes along, the more AI that's used, right? The more people aren't going to have work, and that's a scary thing. The reality of the situation is, it brings up a completely different question. And that question is, what technology do we have today that can actually improve the quality of life of human beings? And then the question is, what limits that technology from being implemented while still maintaining the quality of life of human beings? And this is one of the big things that we're going to get into in just a second. The first thing I got to do here, though, is we got to talk about what is it going to cost to do this whole thing. So we already know Yang can see that automation is going to take things over and that we got to act quickly to address the root causes, not the symptoms. Now, even within that, the reality of the situation, he's still not addressing the root cause here. And we're going to get to that in a second. But let's talk about cost, because obviously, this is what goes on in people's minds as they hear these ideas. And it's important to continue to have these conversations while addressing some of the big questions that people do have. So reality is, we can sit here and we can argue all day long about a policy's cost, what it's going to take, what's going to happen, and so forth. You're also probably watching this thinking, oh, is Joe in favor of this idea? Is he in favor of Yang? Is he a socialist? Is he a Democrat? What is he? Well, I don't play into any of this stuff. The reality of the situation is I look at what's going on in the world and I look at what's happening and I say, how can we solve the challenges and get to the end result, which is I want humanity to thrive. That's my main intention here. I want humanity to thrive. And what do we need to remove? What do we need to change that actually is man-made that limits humanity's ability to thrive, right? That's kind of where I'm coming from. But let's talk about cost here for a second. So the reality of the situation is, what his team is proposing is that it's going to cost, I think it's $3 to $4 trillion or so a year, somewhere in that range of, because again, there's still a lot of factors involved in how exactly this will work, right? But it's going to cost trillions of dollars a year to implement this particular policy. Now, he believes that through charging a bit of a tax, right? So when you ask the question, who's going to pay for it? Through charging a bit of a tax on some goods, not all goods, right? You're essentially going to make it so that businesses are going to have to shuffle things around, and ultimately, like, there's a whole explanation on his website that I think you should read at the end of the day if you're really interested in looking at this. I'm summarizing, but he believes that businesses are going to have to change some of what they're doing to lower some of the costs, because consumers aren't ultimately going to just pay 10% on every single good that's out there. So he believes that there's a big systemic change that's going to happen between the way businesses price and do things and the way consumers are going to purchase. And ultimately, part of the money, the universal basic income, so the initial trillions of dollars that's popped in to allow people to have this benefit over the course of time, majority of that money is going to go back into the economy, because his belief is that ultimately people are going to have more freedom, more ability to spend money on things that are, like, hey, I want to go out and maybe do this extra thing, or I'm going to buy food with this thing. I'm going to go and upgrade my car that has a particular issue that I haven't been able to afford because, I don't have the money to do so, right? So his feeling is that because it's a small amount of money, it's not like suddenly you're going to quit your job and your whole life is paid for, right? Because it's a small amount of money, people are still going to have to keep work for the most part, whether they change their job, whether they look into maybe starting a business or something like that. For the most part, people are only going to use this to spend for the most part. And so he believes a lot of the money is going to go back into the economy, returning, creating more tax dollars that goes back into the government. So his belief is that, yes, it's going to cost trillions, but they might also get back a good chunk of money that will alleviate some of that initial cost. And of course, you're only really going to find out if you do it. There's only so much projection that can be done, right? And when you start bringing in politics into the mix, now all of a sudden, it's not even about looking at it honestly what it could do. It's about how can I stifle this policy or make it look bad and so forth, right? So this whole discussion of arguing over what it's going to cost and what's going to happen and what it's going to look like and how it's going to work, blah, 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 is something that inherently humans do all day long. And it's a man-made argument that isn't necessary, which is what we're going to get into in a second. But the reality of the situation is, cost-wise, we're talking about trillions of dollars. He feels a lot of this money is going to end up coming back to the government at the end of the day, but we don't really know. Where did the beliefs that we have today come from, and what system created those beliefs? And is that system not causing the very issue we're trying to solve now?